I am Sanjay Bhardwaj from Department of Computer Science and Applications, DAV College for Girls, Yamunanagar. The topic of discussion for this lecture is features of object-oriented programming language. We will start with the concept of what basically object-oriented programming language is and how the need of this particular programming arises. There are two basic programming paradigms. One is function-oriented, and the another one is object-oriented. We will try to find out the difference between the two. Now, basically, C language is a function-oriented language, and C++, this one is a object-oriented language. Now, what is function-oriented language? Function basically is set of tasks which are performed for a particular activity. Now, that is known as function. In function-oriented programming language, everything is given in the form of functions. That means how to perform the things, how to perform a particular task, that are indicated, that are listed, and those are known as a function. As an example, I say driving. Driving a vehicle, it needs certain steps, and that basically represents a function. I say teaching. Teaching basically is sequence of steps, and that particularly is known as function. Now, the statement or the word teaching or driving, that does not explain the things completely. For example, if I say driving, now driving, that is not a fixed procedure. Driving is no doubt a sequence of steps, but driving steps changes from vehicle to vehicle. That means driving a scooter is different from that driving a car. So the first part which I said is driving. This driving is a function. Now driving a scooter plus driving, now I think this represents the complete task. Similarly, car plus driving, this represents another particular process. That means only driving is not a sufficient process. Driving applied on the scooter, driving applied on the car, that represents a well explained process. I use the word teaching. Teaching, it is a sequence of steps. It is a function. Now, teaching is a function. But teaching of history and teaching of computer science, I hope, are the different things. That means teaching, when joined with the history, this is different. This is different from teaching when selected with computer science. Now, these examples indicate that only function is not the sufficient to explain the things. Rather, function applied on the particular data, that represents a complete entity. Now, object. This particular group is known as object. Object is the function as well as the data on which the function is performed. It is the function and the data on which the function is performed. That means this is very important. The function is performed on which particular data. With the change in data, the function even changes. This gave the need of object-oriented programming. We shifted from function-oriented programming to object-oriented programming because of the need of this data. If I give another example, say another example is, I add two integer numbers. This is how the integer numbers are added. One number will be added to another number. Now the same word addition, I say I want to perform on one distance and the another distance. The word is, again, the operation or the function is addition, but the function changes with the data. When the data is integer, the process is different. When the data is distance, the process is different. And if it is a string, when the two strings are concatenated, I say I am adding two strings. This is again a different process as compared to the addition of distance or as compared to addition of simply numbers. Now the process is then combination of this data and the operation performed on that data, this becomes more significant as compared to only the steps to perform a particular task. Now because of this need, we change from function oriented language to object oriented language. In other words, the process changed from C language to C++ language. With this discussion, this is very clear that most important thing in C++ language is object, and by up to this discussion we are very clear that the object is combination of the data items and the operations performed on those data items. Now I will come basically to the features of object oriented language. Now features of object oriented language, no doubt the first basic feature is the class. This is the most important part in object oriented programming language. The another I will be discussing will be no doubt the object. Now classes and objects, these are important features of object oriented programming languages. Another word which I will discuss is encapsulation. Encapsulation. This is another important feature which we will discuss. The next one is, that is data abstraction. Data abstraction. Abstraction is basically this feature which we will be using. And the another one is, that is data hiding. This is another feature that we will be using for the object oriented programming language. Another one is inheritance. Inheritance is another word or another feature which is used with the object oriented programming language. And then next come polymorphism. Polymorphism. This is another word that is very important. And another one is say message passing. The message passing is another one. So we will discuss these features one by one with object oriented programming language. The first one is a class. Now I said the important thing with any function is the data on which this particular function is applied. Now this class is a user defined data type. User defined data type which is combination of the data items and the operations performed on those data item. We can think of a class, say employee. Now employee class will be having certain data items like name of the employee, identity number of the employee, address of the employee, and other qualification of the employee and other information. This is basically the data in this particular class. The operations performed on this class may be that enrollment of the employee, then leave of the employee, then a qualification increment of the employee, and most importantly it can be pay calculation of the employee. So there are two basic things. One is the data and the operations performed on those data item. Another example I say कि book is a class. Now if book is a class, the data item related to it can be name of the book, the number of pages in the book, the title of the book, the author of the book, subject for which this book is. Now these are the data items. Now if I relate this to library, I can say issuing a book, that can be one of the function, returning the book, that can be another function, so purchase of the book, that can be another function, write of any particular book, that can be another function. Now these are the functions, these are the operations that can be performed on that particular book. So class is combination of data items and the operations performed on those data items. In object oriented programming language, the class is represented as class and its name and then private, data members and member functions. It can be data or it can be functions, the operations performed on the data. Similarly, there can be public and then data members and member functions. Member functions. Data members represent the values associated with the class, and the member function represents the operations performed on that particular class. Now, what basically a class is? Class is a user-defined data type which is combination of data items and the operations performed on those data items. Data members represent the values associated with the class, and the member function represents the operations performed on that particular data item. For example, I said employee, I said book. If on the basis of data type, if I say I take a data and that is distance. Now in distance, I can have a distance in kilometers and meters. These two basically are the data item, the value in kilometer and the value in meter. The distance is measured in kilometer and meter. The operations performed on those addition of two distances, I can add two distances, and then comparison of two distances. These can be the functions performed on this. And in whole, this particular is known as the class. So it is a user-defined data type which is combination of data items and the operations performed on those data items. Now the next feature is object. Object is basically runtime entity of any object-oriented programming language. This basically a blueprint. This is a blueprint. This indicates the type of data. Now this particular is the object exists in the program. It takes the data, it holds the data, and the operations are performed on this. If I relate the type basically is the class, and the variable name will be object. I can say variable of the type class is an object. Class, this is type, and object, this basically is a variable. A class can have number of objects. For example, I say book is a class, and C++ book or C language book or DBMS book, all these are the objects whose class is book. Now the variable of the class of the type class, that is known as object. Now in both these class and object, what we say is that data and the functions, these two are wrapped into a particular structure. Now in the class, data members are there as well as member functions are there. So data and members, these are wrapped into a single structure that is known as a class, and this concept is known as encapsulation. So encapsulation is wrapping the data and functions into a single structure. This is basically what is called encapsulation. The another very important word is data hiding, the feature which is related to object-oriented programming. Now some of the data items that cannot be accessed directly in the program, that are accessed with the help of member functions, that are accessed with the help of the functions of that particular class. They cannot be directly accessed into the program. Such members are known as the private members of the class. So private members of the class are those members which can be accessed within the class or which can be accessed by the members of the class. If someone wants to use those members, the requirement is the member function, which are public. Those public member functions use the private data part and provide the information to the user. This is basically known as data hiding. All of you are studying in a college. Now in college, your information is kept in the registers, and those registers are kept in a class that is known as the office. Now within the office, your information is the data, and the steps performed by the operations performed by the clerks, that is basically known as the methods or the procedures. If you need some information, You cannot go directly and open the register and find out the information. You had to go through the clerk. You have to go through the procedure. You have to go through the public members. The members which can interact publicly, you have to go through those members. Those members will take your requirement. They will go to the private part. They will assess the information and will be providing you back. That means the public members are the interface between the private parts of the class as well as the user. User will be giving its requirement to the public members. Public members will be taking information from the private data, and private data from that information will be given to user as per the requirement. That means there are authenticated way of assessing the data. The data can be assessed only through the public member. So authentication of data assess that increases by this particular feature, and the particular feature is data hiding. So making certain part of the class, mostly it is data that is not directly accessible to the user. This particular feature is known as data hiding. In a class, the functionality is implemented in the form of member functions. When a user assesses this, user only assesses the calls the member function. When user calls the member function, the functionality which is behind the function is not visible to the user, and this particular is known as data abstraction. As a day-to-day type process, I say abstraction. Not driving. While driving, I just hold the steering of the vehicle. Now, steering of the vehicle is used by the user to drive a car. Now, what other functionality that is hidden within the engine or within the vehicle itself? This particular is an example of a abstraction. I say there are two types of pen. Now, when I use any particular pen, I am just using the functionality that how I will be. What internal step is performed within it, that is basically abstraction. If a mobile phone, I just dial a number by pressing the buttons. The basic process, the functionality is inside, and that is known as abstraction. Similarly, in a class, the function or the steps to be performed are given within the class. Outside the class, we only assess this member function, and this particular part is known as abstraction. Say, for a distance type data, I write a line d3 dot, this is add, and in braces, in parentheses, this is d1 and d2. This particular statement means I will be adding two distances d1 and d2, and the result will be stored in the distance d3. Now, these two are added and the stored in d3. This functionality is basically given within the class, and in the main program we will be using this statement only, and this is known as abstraction. That means we are using this fact without going into the details how these are implemented. The implementation part is within this particular class. Now I come to the next step, and that basically is inheritance. Now, inheritance is a property in which is a feature in which features of one class are used in the another class without redefining those features. Say I am having one class, I want to use the functionality or features of this class into another class, and this concept is known as inheritance, and this is available in object oriented programming, and this is very useful for reusing the code. The code which is once developed, it can be reused again without rewriting the code, and this feature basically is known as inheritance. There are a number of types of inheritance. Now, inheritance, the original, this basically is known as the base class, and the next one is known as the derived class. Now, different combination of base and derived class can be implemented. Like there can be one base class and more derived class. There can be number of derived class, and there can be a single base class. All these features can be used as per the requirement of the program. But basically inheritance is using the features of one class into the another class without redefining those features. The next one is polymorphism. Now what basically a polymorphism is? Polymorphism is the object taking more than one form. One object taking more than one form. That means as per the requirement, this form changes. I said D3 dot add and in bracket say it is D1 and D2. Addition of distance D1 and D2 and the result is stored in D3. Now C3, I say complex numbers, addition of complex number C1 and C2. Now both of these are representing addition. This is representing addition, this is representing addition. But internally they will be different. Their outer look is similar, but internally adding a distance will be different as addition from the complex numbers. If I write something like this, C3 is equal to C1 plus C2, that means I want to add two complex numbers and store the result in the third. And I say D3 is equal to D1 plus D2, I want to add two distances and store the result in the third distance. Now both the statements seems to be similar. Two complex numbers are added and the result is stored in the third. Two distances are added and the result is stored in the third. And if I say A is equal to B plus C, these are the two integer numbers which are added and the result is stored in the third. But the operation performed in this function, the operation performed in this function, and similarly operation performed in this function, all the three are different. Numbers are added with a different process, distances are added with a different process, complex numbers are added in the different process. Now this is another very important feature of object-oriented programming, that we get polymorphism. Now polymorphism we get by function overloading, operator overloading. These are the, and no doubt dynamic binding can be another one which is used for polymorphism. Now polymorphism can be of runtime or compile time, and the words which I used, they are used for this, achieving this polymorphism. The next one is message passing. Now message is basically a function which is to be performed, right? It is used by the object. Now in object-oriented program, we use different objects, and these objects interact with each other, and they interact with the help of the functions. For example, if I say, I use this example, C3 dot add, and this is C1 and C2. Now in this case, this one is the object, and this object is using this message, the method. This is the message which it is using, and the information given to execute this message is C1 and C2. Now basically, as per the code, C1 and C2 will be added and the result will be stored in this particular. Now with this particular statement, the objects are interacting with each other, and this basically is known as the message passing process. Now these are some of the features which are used in object-oriented programming language, features of object-oriented programming. The first one is, that is class. It is a user-defined data type which is combination of the data items and the operations performed on those data items. These two are enclosed in the single structure, and that is what is known as encapsulation. This basically is a data type. When the variables of this data type are created, those are known as objects. The next one is data abstraction, and abstraction basically means using the facts without going into the details of the process. Classes are known as abstract data types because in class we create the logic, and then in the program we use those logics without going into the details there, how these are implemented. That is, those are known as abstract data types. The next one is data hiding, making some of the components unavailable to directly use in the program. That is known as data hiding. Those features can be assessed in the main program, but not directly. They are assessed through the public members. They are. So making some of the features hidden. This is known as data hiding. Then using features of one class into the another class, this basically is known as inheritance without redefining those features. So features of one class used in the another class without redefining them, that is basically known as inheritance process. And polymorphism is the objects having more than one form, that is known as, here these operations having different forms as per the type of the data, this is known as polymorphism. And message passing in object oriented programming is interaction of different objects, because objects are the runtime entities. When they interact with each other with the help of the functions, with the help of the methods, we call it message passing. So we shifted to C, from C to C++, from function oriented to object oriented programming language, because the importance of data is there, the importance on the fact that on which particular data the function is applied. This is the need of object oriented programming language, in which in addition to the operations, the data is also very important on which those particular operations are performed. Now this topic was all about the features of object oriented programming language. Thank you very much.